everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins, the Curator of Public Programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. The Fowler is very excited to present today's program as part of our World Arts Local Lives digital programs. This is the first of our Share the Mic series. The Fowler believes in the civic duty of museums to give forum to different points of view and is committed to amplifying the voices and concerns of Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized peoples. This series offers a platform to thought leaders, artists, activists, and allies who are guiding us along the arc of justice. We are pleased to be presenting this panel discussion, Intersections, Gender Equity and Anti-Racism at the Ballot Box, in partnership with Time's Up Now. But first, an important message from Bruins Vote, UCLA's nonpartisan voter registration coalition. Registering to vote is easy and takes less time than making a bag of popcorn. We need to make sure our voices are heard this fall, and if you're a US citizen and will be 18 years old by November 3rd, registering to vote is the first step. You may need to re-register if you've already registered but will be living at a different address this fall, or if you need to request a mail-in ballot to a new address. If you've already registered to vote at the right address, you should make a plan to vote. How, when, and where. Write it down and stick to it. If you need to register, please go to studentvote.org. Anyone can use this link to register. You don't need to be a student. If you have any questions about voting, head to bruinsvote.ucla.edu, our one-stop shop resource for voting and election information. And if you're not eligible to vote, don't forget to go to 2020census.gov to fill out the census and gain 10 grand worth of resources for your community over the next 10 years. Everyone, regardless of citizenship status, should fill out the census for their household. Today, we are joined by a dynamo panel of leaders in the fight for gender equity and ending racism, including Jess Morales Rocketto, Civic Engagement Director of the National Domestic Workers Alliance and Executive Director of Care in Action, Marya Bangee, Executive Director at Harness, an organization that works within Hollywood to center the narratives of marginalized communities in popular culture. Visual artist Ashley Lukashevsky, whose illustrations grace the pages of the popular children's book Anti-Racist Baby. Sarah Eaglehart, social justice storyteller and CEO of Return to the Heart Foundation, an Indigenous women-led grant-making organization. And Aditi Fruitwala, staff attorney at the ACLU of Southern California for the LGBTQ, Gender and Reproductive Justice Project. This conversation will be moderated by Angie Jean-Marie, Director of Public Engagement at Time's Up. If you have any questions during this program for the participants or about voting, registering to vote, or the census, please submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you'd like to hear answered by the panelists at the end of the program, and any questions about voting will be answered directly by a team member of #BruinsVote. Okay, that's it from me. Over to you, panelists.
Awesome, thank you, Bianca. Thank you everyone for joining us for tonight's conversation. As Bianca mentioned, this is a pretty epic group of people, many of whom I am glad to say are not just co-conspirators in this work, but dear, dear friends. They are some of the most hardworking activists in the movement for gender equity and social justice. As Bianca mentioned, their experience ranges from building worker power to activating influencers for good to using the power of art for change. These are folks behind so many of my favorite social activism projects, from the recent tribute to essential workers led by the National Domestic Workers Alliance to the New York Times bestselling book, Anti-Racist Baby, illustrated by Ashley. Again, I'm Angie Jean-Marie. I'm the Director of Public Engagement at Time's Up. We are an organization with an ambitious and bold mission to achieve a world where work is safe, fair, and dignified for everyone. We emerged out of a moment of reckoning amidst the Me Too resurgence. And also, boy, this year has been a year of reckonings upon reckonings upon reckonings, all of which are absolutely necessary, actually, though, to reveal the systemic inequalities at the heart of so many of our structures, and then to bring more people into the fold, folks like you who are watching, folks like those who are on the virtual panel today, in the fight for transformative change. So we're gonna hop right into the conversation. As Bianca mentioned, we really want this to be an engaging, interactive discussion. So as you're listening in, and if something's resonating with you, feel free to drop that in the chat. If you have a comment, put it in the chat. And we'll also have a feedback portion for later. So as things emerge for you, feel free to ask your questions and we'll get to it in just a little bit. So I'm gonna dive in. I'm gonna start with Jess. I saw the heads nodding with the conversation about reckonings and this being a really hard year. And the work that you do is meant, Ashley, really rocking with that. We are amidst a moment, amidst this sort of this caregiving crisis, which obviously is so central to the work that you do at the National Domestic Workers Alliance. But the caregiving crisis is happening on multiple fronts. On one front, caregivers are more essential than ever, with school closures and parents being required to balance, doing their job with their children and working. Obviously this is a global health pandemic, so caregivers are more essential than ever right now. And yet we know that caregivers are vulnerable and unprotected in so many ways, especially by the laws that are on our books. And then on another front, we're seeing just how inadequate, like purely inadequate, our systems of care are, our laws are to support folks in community. And so, as we're the school year has just started, this is another this is very top of mind for folks. And so obviously a very essential gender equity issue as we enter the election. So can you shed some light on what's going on with the caregiving crisis, who is impacted by it, and what it means for the upcoming election?
Oh my goodness, Angie, you're like the best lead-in in the world. This is great. I'm gonna carry you just everywhere with me. I'm so excited to be here. I'm an LA native, and I gotta be honest with you, my family is a house divided. We are USD UCLA house divided family. So when I told my mom about this, she was very excited. When I told my dad, he was like, you gotta go give the Trojans a call. So here we are. So I am such a fan and colleague of Time's Up and in the work that we are all doing together. This caregiving crisis is both an invention of the global crisis we are in around racism, around the health crisis of COVID-19, and also the economic crisis of our recession, depression, whatever you want to call it, 2020 special terrible gift, right? So we live in that, but also all of the challenges around vulnerability of domestic workers and the marginalization of domestic workers in our economy existed well before this moment. So what I like to tell people about the caregiving crisis, in particular in the context of COVID-19, is this is not a great equalizer. It just revealed what has already been happening to everyone. And what I actually do think is there is a special crisis that kind of exists around caregiving related to COVID, which I'll get to, but first I want to talk about domestic workers. So we are 2.5 million nannies, house cleaners, and elder care workers, home care workers that work inside your home. So if you have an amazing woman that makes it possible for you to work in the home, if you have a care worker that helps make sure Abuela can eat and go to the bathroom and be safe in her house, those are our peeps. These are a workforce that makes on average between $11,000 and $13,000 a year, so well below the poverty line. We are almost 100% women and 99% women of color, probably 98% if I'm being more conservative. And really the roots of this work literally go all the way back to slavery. That is why it is marginalized. That is why it is vulnerable, because domestic work was the work of African slave women and then became the work of African American women and then became the work of immigrant women. Many of them because it is the only thing that they have in the economy that they can get because of their immigration status. So we have a huge immigrant workforce. So I say all of that because it's really important to understand that, to understand what the crisis is happening around caregiving, because you had the most marginal and vulnerable in our economy and in our society hit with a pandemic that they are more likely to be susceptible to catch and then die from, in an economy where the market has completely crashed. You can't go into people's homes where this work happens right now. So we have many, many workers who are telling us they are trying to find other types of work that they have no idea when they will be able to go back to caring for, in some cases, children that they've been caring for years and years, families they've been working with for 10, 15, 20 years. And you also have undocumented immigrants who may not have access to healthcare, we don't have access to government services. And so when the checks came through, these are folks who need the checks the most and also cannot access them. So all of that together means that we have a crisis around caregiving for caregivers, for the workers who provide that care at every single level. And then what has also happened is that family caregivers, so you're taking care of your older brother or sister, your elders, your grandma taking care of your grandparents, now have a completely new resonance in our society, because I think a lot of people have learned how difficult it is to care for your children or for your elders. maybe you didn't know, but now you know. And so we have people who have not necessarily engaged with care outside of their individual family unit that are now understanding something incredibly important. If you only hear one thing that I say today, I want you to understand this. Care is a collective responsibility in our society, in our economy, and for our government. It is so, so, so important. If you're having trouble managing your kids and their school, your parents and their medical attention, that's because it shouldn't be that way. It's not possible to manage all of those things together. I am both devastated every single week when we hear from workers who are telling us that they are making at most $300 a week right now, and those are the folks who are doing really well. And also hopeful because we have actually in this moment transformed the way that people think about care, and that's the first step towards the kind of policy and structural change that we need to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
I mean, just to sort of stay here a minute longer, I appreciate you, and we'll sort of talk about the role of culture and narrative change in, creating the sort of evolutions that we want to see. But this idea of culture of care as a collective responsibility is key. And so often in our policy, we don't think about the role that we play with one another. So that's just it's a cultural problem for us. So, but as we are all thinking about getting registered to vote, finding out, making our decisions, what responsibility do we have when we're making those ballot box level decisions? Not necessarily about who it is that we're voting for, but how does this come into play when we're trying to make those choices?
Yeah, I think that we are finding that on both sides, more people are understanding that our care system was not built for literally the modern economy and modern society. And there are a couple things I think are really important for people to understand. So one, office that you should get familiar with is labor commissioner, believe it or not. Oh, sorry, that's my pup Nacho joining the proceedings. Labor commissioner is really important. They help understand how we do work and how work is defined in our society. Many domestic workers do not have basic labor protections because they are not considered employees, and employees is the magic word that makes it possible for you to get water breaks, days off, be able to get back wages if your wages get stolen from you. So labor commissioner, that's really important. And I think the other thing that's really important is you should look into how people are talking about care, how they think about care. Are they putting the burden of care on individual families and frankly, the cost of care on individual families? Because this stuff is not cheap. If you have an elderly relative who's been to the hospital and then gets out and needs 24-hour care, that is work, and it takes a lot from you and from them. And so it has to get paid for. And many Medicaid and Medicare do not actually support caregiver supports for caregivers for families. And then, I don't know about you, I don't have just money laying around like that to be able to, it's just families don't, especially after they just had an elderly relative get out of the hospital. So I think those are the two kind of big things I would say, really open your eyes. Labor commissioner, and are people putting the responsibility and cost of care on us, or are they saying we're going to support you and give you the money that you need to be able to support your loved ones in these dire moments? I
just learned something new, and I always think I know everything. I don't. I will be looking out in the future for Labor Commissioner for sure. Aditi, at the ACLU SoCal, you focused on expanding access to policies like paid sick leave, which is obviously connected to care work as well. And while California is a leader on this issue, even more so with the bill that was passed, that was signed into law today by Governor Newsom, the US does remain one of the only countries that does not offer paid leave. So again, kind of connected to the question that Jess was responding to, like, why is that a critical issue for people? And why is it important that even if we have it in California, that we still feel activated to talk about it for our, colleagues and brothers and sisters and whomever in other places? And I'm realizing that we're asking a lot of these questions around caregiving, and we're kind of talking to maybe a student audience potentially. So why does it even matter to them?
Yeah, so today is such a great day to talk about this because, like you said, just 5 hours ago, Governor Newsom signed a new paid family leave bill, SB 1383, and the signing ceremony was so much more emotional than I was ready for. I cried during the ceremony because they had people who had worked on the bill brought their kids to the signing, and then the kids held up photos and drawings of their families and said, this is why this bill is important. It's because this person can stay home and care for me. It was really emotional and just a beautiful, beautiful signing ceremony. So I sort of want to kind of talk a little bit about what paid family leave is, because I think a lot of people have different ideas. Jess laid out just a beautiful description of why caregiving broadly is important. And there's so many different policies that go into what we need to actually caregive for each other. And so paid family leave is just one of them. So paid family leave is when you take off a prolonged period of time to care for a sick family member or a new baby. Sometimes it's called paternity leave or maternity leave. In California, we call it paid family leave because we're gender neutral. There are queer families, there are non-binary folks, like we call it parental leave or paid family leave. And in California, you get 8 weeks off. What happened today, the reason it was so momentous, is because one problem with California's law was that it didn't cover everyone. It gave everyone 8 weeks off, but it didn't protect those people's jobs. So if there was 40% of the California workforce that was paying into this benefit, and would take the 8 weeks, come back, and then they could be fired for taking those 8 weeks. It was nonsense. And the way that we get that 40% is it was essentially anyone who works for an employer with less than 50 people could be fired for taking paid family leave. And who do you think that impacts? It's largely immigrants. It's largely women of color who work for smaller employers and mom and pop shops. And so they were getting fired for taking paid family leave, or they wouldn't take it because they were scared of getting fired, reasonably so. So what this law does is it lowers that threshold from 50 employees to 5 employees. So now almost everyone in California can take paid family leave, which is huge. It's not perfect. There's still a long way to go. But Angie, like you said, California is still one of the only states that has paid family leave. The US is one of 2 countries that does not have a federal policy. It's us and Papua New Guinea. It's atrocious. And even in the US, only 8 states have a paid family leave program. And the reason this is important, the reason this is even looped into this conversation at all, is paid family leave is necessary for gender equity and racial equity at work. Paid family leave does a lot of things for health, mental health, physical health for babies and birth parents, which, is sort of tangential to this particular conversation. But the reason it's necessary for gender equity is, connected to what Jess said. The first reason is that women are already caring for children at home, right? This is the legacy of slavery. Women are already doing this work. Whether we provide paid family leave or not, it's happening. And when we don't provide paid family leave, it's unpaid labor. And so this is just compensating women for the work that they're already doing. The second reason is that when there's paid family leave, women are more likely to return to the workforce. We see those stats again and again and again, that people, leave the workforce to care for their children or care for a sick family member and are less likely to return if their job isn't there for them. It's just harder to get back to where they were. And then the third reason that gets talked about a lot less, but is equally as important, is that paid family leave allows fathers to be engaged in raising children. In California, the 8 weeks is for any gender. It's not just maternity leave. And so studies have shown that oftentimes when fathers have the 8 weeks, they will take the 8 weeks. And when you care for a child at early stages, you're more likely to be involved in childcare at later stages in the kid's life. So there's just gender equity broadly at home, which spills into gender equity broadly in our culture. So why this is important is because we all have families. This is one of those things that it's actually really easy to activate people on because it's so easy to understand. We all have families, and whether we've needed to take time off to care for a family member yet, you likely will at some point. And so the question now is, well, whether you'll have a job to come back to when you need to take time off, and whether you'll be paid when you take that time off. So, you know, even if it hasn't directly implicated your life, it absolutely will, because this is the way that, you know, we have families and we have work, and this is the way to kind of bridge that gap.
Something that I think is one that's all incredible, and congrats to us, but like, boy, do we need to change these laws across the country as well. And one of the things that I really appreciate about the work at ACLU is the way that you all have been approaching sort of an expansive definition of who's part of your family, right? Thinking about chosen family. And so, you know, we obviously need leaders who understand that and are willing to get engaged and activated. And we just shared just like a little bit also about the work that you've been doing in LA around paid leave for folks who are local.
Yeah, I would love to. So that has been kind of slow moving work. You know, ultimately we want to get to a place where when we say we're taking time off to care for family, it means anyone that you consider family, whether they're related by blood, affinity, or, you know, just close connection. And one place that we've actually been successful in that is our paid sick days law in Los Angeles. So LA mandates that you can take off, every employee in LA gets a minimum of 6 days of paid sick days. And you can take that time off to care for any family member that's related to you by blood, affinity, or any relationship that you feel is like a familial relationship. LA is really unique in that. Even San Francisco, Oakland, they have what's called a designated person, where you designate one person at the beginning of your employment to say, this is the person I would take off for that's not related to me by law. So yes, the LA model is really what we're trying to export. It is hard. I will say that, I mean, anything that expands the rights of workers faces just a huge backlash from business, and business influence is so big at every level of our government. And so every time we bring this to the legislator, which we tried to do with paid family leave, we really try to expand the definition of who you could take time off to care for. And this is important not just for LGBTQ communities, but it's really important for immigrant communities. I mean, immigrant communities are formed in different ways, and we care for each other in a more of a broad spectrum than other communities might. And so we keep reiterating that, and we get so much pushback from business saying, well, if you can take time off to care for anyone, then people are just going to take time off all the time, as if we are desperate to care for strangers on the street. So, we should be, but that is not the way that our system works. And so, yeah, this is an issue that every single year we bring up, and every single year we get shot down, which is why really local politics are also really important. Local elections are really important to pay attention to, because sometimes really amazing progressive work gets done at the local level, like this paid sick days law we were able to get passed in LA.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So Sarah, coming to you next. We had a moment before this event started about your lipstick, which it looks amazing. Thank you for showing all of us up.
Straight on, but yeah, I got it.
In your work, you've been working for a really long time to center the experiences of Indigenous women. And I think part of what I feel like is a thread throughout what Jess has said and what Aditi has said is that there's so much about like making people's stories visible and experiences visible so that the solutions that we devise work, right? And I know you've been doing so much work in coalition with other folks, but have been at the center of trying to make the experiences, the voices, and the stories of Indigenous women visible. What are the solutions that support economic and workplace justice for Indigenous women? And then for all of us, both folks who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous, what is our responsibility to join in the fight to make those solutions a reality?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I'm really just honored to be with you all. It's so fascinating because I think that, before COVID hit, I had planned this whole organization, Return to the Heart Foundation, and co-founded it at the end of December. And my whole idea was like, okay, I know that Indigenous women have the solutions at the center of everything that they do. And I know that they already think collectively. I know that they are already grounded in their community solutions. And I started thinking about the things that we need as a community, but also that everybody else needs, right? Like those solutions are solutions that people really need to know and understand. And number one, you can see that with the fire, right? Like the fires happened, and then everyone is like, oh yeah, remember Native Americans talked about controlled burning? Yeah, maybe we should fund that. Like maybe that's actually a health issue that should be funded. And some, foundations have actually done that. So I'm going to give them a shout out because California Endowment has funded that work. So we do have a tangible example, but more people need to do that. So with Return to the Heart Foundation, we wanted to support Indigenous women-led initiatives because we knew that they were at the center. COVID hit. Of course, these were the women that were organizing on the ground already, so of course they were organizing around COVID response. They were getting PPE. And then being somebody who has been in the field for such a long time and having relationship both in the grassroots community as well as within the philanthropy, I sort of said, well, what can I do? Like I can help get resources to these women. So I jumped in there, and I want to say one of the most successful things that happened was because women at foundations listened. A lot of times Native Americans, because people don't understand our context, our culture, our issues, tribal rights, the sovereignty, we have to do this whole like learning, expedition of like, well, let's just go back 400, 500 years in 30 minutes. But we had run into some really great foundation staff that women who organized internally within their foundations to help get over $500,000 out the door within a month as a COVID response. This, moment of COVID, like we have definitely been shown that foundations can move fast, right? Solutions can move fast. When previously we were told that we had to, jump through all kinds of hoops and all this stuff. But what I would say is that really supporting leaders that are entrenched in their communities is really, really key. And I'm hearing that all over from not just Native organizations, but also non-Native organizations that being in coalition and partnership with, that, they were able to get those solutions on the ground immediately. And they were, and just so easily, and already had the relationships in place to make it happen. And I think those solutions come from thinking broadly, thinking holistically, and also just thinking about how can I help my community. So it's not something that is so hard, but I think COVID has really unveiled that. I think that there's a shifting of worldviews that has to happen. This moment has also shown us that, America was already struggling, right? And then all of a sudden they were like, oh yeah, like we have all of this trauma that we're dealing with, and now we're stuck with ourselves at home, and we can't, we have to work on our own mental health, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with the capitalistic systems that we're all a part of, right? And that glorify dysfunction and drama. And, we have to really change that perspective because, the entertainment industry loves that stuff, right? It sells, but yet, this is what we're dealing with as a result. And there have definitely been, increases in suicide rates, increases in mental health episodes for many, many, many communities. So, Native women, like many other people of color, communities, are suffering. They're not only organizing, they're not only caring for their children, they're not only taking care of their family, they're also taking care of their community. And you know what? They were already tired a year ago. We were talking about how tired all the organizers were a year ago. So, it definitely, as we're heading into getting out the vote in these last, 40 days do we have? 39, it's very
47, not counting.
Okay, that's a little bit better. It's very concerning because we all have to get ready. We all have to get out the vote, and we have to pull in our families to get out that vote, and that's going to take that personal one-on-one work.
There's so much in what you said that resonates. I've written down for myself, I will live this and breathe this. Capitalism loves dysfunction and drama. I'm going to reflect on that later. I'm going to hold on to that. But also what you've been saying about, I mean, and I think activists have been saying this forever, right? Listen to the people who are most proximate to the problem. And we did this event earlier this week. I've had a week of very legendary people with Gloria Steinem and Paula Giddings, like an amazing Black feminist leader. And Gloria was talking about, you know, giving advice, and she mentioned, like, none of us learn by talking, we learn by listening. And so that sort of moment that you're talking about with funders, that like revelatory thing of like just taking the time to listen and hear was really important. And then Paula mentioned, in the context of Black women in particular, she, I think, was quoting Toni Morrison and saying that Black women are both the ship and the harbor, right? But that's true of so many women of color. We leave on a voyage to fight the battle, right? And we also are that nurturing retreat for people at home. That's really hard. And so I don't even know what to do with that, but that's sort of what's coming up for me as you've been talking. And, you know, we've been having this kind of a conversation just here about, you know, the impacts of Black women, impacts on immigrant women, impacts on Indigenous women. And part of, I think, the value of the work that everyone here on the call is doing is that our experiences are not siloed and they're deeply connected. So that means we have to be working together. So I'm inspired by that. Not that anyone was asking. So obviously we're in this like big political moment in the run up to the election. We've also been in this big cultural moment. Some of what you've been talking is necessary, Sarah, like, you know, sort of thinking about transformative change. It's some, and I think the thing that's cool about working in activism is some of it's by design and some of it's by happenstance. And I really respect the work that Marya, you do at Harness, like really proactively engaging and organizing cultural influencers to get engaged on a range of issues. I think all of us benefited from the work that your organization did around after George Floyd's murder, with Defund the Police, with BLM. Will you talk about what is it that you do? What does Harness do? What are the projects that you're working on? And how do those projects sort of sit at this intersection of anti-racism, gender equity, and getting out the vote?
Yeah, easy questions, Angie. Thank you for having us. I feel really honored to be here with this group of legendary women who are doing incredible work. And I also, you know, want to do a shout out. I went to USC for graduate school, but I worked at UCLA, so I got my Bruin pride. So I'm just putting that out there. In terms of the work that I do, so Harness is an organization. It was started by people from within Hollywood, America Ferrera, Wilmer Valderrama, and Ryan Pierce Williams. And the idea was, how can we think about using the power of art and culture and storytelling to really co-create and co-imagine a more just world, and do that in community, deep relationship, deep community with activists. And so we've been around for about 4 years. And, you know, initially we were doing that through a lot of conversations, trainings, things like that. Now we've started to really incubate like deeper projects. And so there's a few things I think I can talk about here in terms of some of the work that we're doing. So one of the things that we're doing right now is kind of listening and ideation with a group of leaders from within the entertainment industry who are thinking about gender justice within entertainment. And so specifically having conversations about what are the needs for people that are leaders in their companies, and, you know, high level creatives, run their own production companies, whatever that might be, in terms of being able for them to understand gender justice in a comprehensive way, and also be able to implement it and be connected to leaders on the ground. So that's kind of one area that we're doing a lot of ideation and incubation around, because we're excited for the possibilities there. And there's a real gap, I think, in terms of people really advocating around this issue, outside of course, the incredible work that Time's Up does. So yeah. And then in addition to that, Harness started a project that we started basically incubating last summer at the Creative Change Retreat, which is a retreat for cultural strategy leaders at Sundance, called Culture Surge, which is a network that we brought together that is led by women of color. There's 4 organizations that anchor it. So Harness is the one, and we house it, but there's also the League, which is led by Tracy Sturdivant, Illuminative, led by Chris Lackohawk, and the Center for Cultural Power, which is run by Fabiana Rodriguez. And we came together, we were kind of deputized by a group of leaders to put together kind of a collective way to create art and kind of have a surge of content before the election. So one of the things, we've identified 5 key states, and we're going to be mobilizing our artist networks to create at least 100 to 150 pieces of our art between now and the election. And so that is going to include, celebrities. So, we're talking about going out to all the folks that we work with on the regular basis, and then visual artists. We're talking about, a DIY crochet bomber who is gonna crochet boat, from all different elements. And what we're really trying to think about is voter turnout for our communities. So Black, Indigenous, people of color, women, gender nonconforming people, and young people. So, and in these key kind of states that are gonna be really important this year. And so that I think is a really important kind of intersection, exactly of what you're talking about, Angie. It's being led by women of color. We're bringing an intersectional lens into this work, and we're really trying to think about, content is king. I should say content is queen this year, in the sense that, a lot of the traditional things that would have been done around an election are not happening, right, because of COVID. And so as a result, if there's no door knocking, like what's the thing that people are looking to? They're looking to culture and art, social media. So if you're an individual artist, if you're an individual person that's like watching this, your power in this moment is maybe more profound now than in any other electoral cycle, because there is so much information and disinformation out there. And what people are looking to is trusted sources, which is often their friends and family, to figure out exactly what they need to do, right? And I think there's a clear mandate that a lot of people feel like something has to be done. But most people, I would say, are really confused about what to do. And so what we're trying to do is galvanize a crucial mass of artists who are going to work in concentration around a key message, which is going to be about making your vote plan. And what we're calling that is mask or mail. So you're going to vote by mask, you're going to vote by mail. We're going to do that and really push that out for the 30 days leading up until the election. So that's an example of some of the work that's happening. And if there are artists that want to get involved with that, we'd love to have them.
I love that. So if you're an artist or a person who loves to create and you're interested, drop your information in the chat. Speaking of artists, Ashley, and must confess for everyone, Ashley's like a dear friend. We've had a great chance, great time working with each other. And I always make this very awkward joke that I feel like I'm her like friend mom, because every time she does something, I'm like, oh, yay, Ashley. So I've gotten a chance to celebrate a lot of your success over these last several years. So you obviously do work that bridges art and activism together. Part of what I find like so inspiring about the work that you do is you talk about challenging issues, whether it's criminal justice, gender equity, gender expansiveness, immigration, and you call out what's wrong for sure, but it's done in a way that's about hope, inspiration, and motivating people to take action. And so you have this unique vantage point. And so as we're having this conversation around the challenges we face at the intersections of these issues, what do you find personally motivating? And I think you're also positioned, like people interact with your content and they interact with your art. I see the comments, I see how far it's shared. And so, what can you tell us about what's motivating to folks in this moment at those intersections?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Angie. I honestly have this memory of when I was first starting out, when I was like still working in an office, and I was like, should I like make prints of this thing that I drew and like sell it as a fundraiser? And Angie was like, yes, do it right now. And I like did it during work. So thanks for that.
I found it the other day, I still have it.
But yeah, I mean, we're living in this time. I was talking to friends recently, and we were referring to it as a dual pandemic, this pandemic of COVID-19 and the pandemic of white supremacy. And, you know, just coming into this event, and we were talking about like this time that we're in, I was nodding my head so intensely at just like how unmotivating you can be, and how like just horrible a lot of things feel right now. And it is really hard to hold on to that hope and hold into that possibility. And I think that's a large part of the work that I do, is just recognizing where we are right now, but really opening our imaginations to where we can be. One of the things I reflect on a lot and definitely have the spirit of in my work is in Emergent Strategy, Adrienne Maree Brown says, you know, right now we're living in the imagination of a select few white men. We're living in an imagination of white supremacy. The world wasn't created this way by nature. It was planned, it was crafted, which means that we then have the power to create the world that we want to see. So a lot of my work is talking about all of these issues that plague us right now with white supremacy, with the patriarchy, with cis heteropatriarchy, with the environmental crises, and look at what the world can look like. What can we create? And I think that that is just so needed as a balm for all the pain that is being experienced right now. And also just kind of like, I see it as a blueprint. Like, if we cannot imagine our way out of it, how do we work towards it? And obviously there's such crucial organizing work done by a lot of the people on this call, but organizers, activists, people on the ground also need hope. And I think that's like what I help to provide, is like, you are not alone in this. We are all fighting this together. And like, this is what we're fighting towards, because or else you'll you know, people are getting tired, people get burnt out, and we need to keep imagining what is on the other side of this. And your other question was about what do I think is motivating people right now? I think it's like senses of community. Right now, while we're so physically alone, we are still seeing so much collaboration and community come together with like all over Los Angeles. There's the community fridges. There's so much mutual aid happening. There's so much still like community and collaboration within queer communities of color. And I think that putting out like visual reminders of that and helping to like create more visibility around that helps people, and people appreciate that, because it's easy to feel alone and jaded right now. And we all just need to keep practicing the discipline of hope.
That was so beautiful. I feel this incredible sense of calm. And I know we want to take some time in a bit to get questions from folks who are watching, but I think the note that Ashley has just put us on is so important. So, I mean, for anyone who wants to answer, maybe we can just go back around, like, what is that collective vision that you're trying to create? If Ashley could illustrate the world that you want to live in, what would it look like? I'm going to come back to you, Jess.
I mean, for us, I think it would be people being cared for. Like, you know, I picture lots of things of people being enveloped in arms, and it's in a place that signifies like beautiful abundance. There's enough for everyone. And I think there is, richness is not exactly the right word, but not just abundance, but also that everybody feels cared for. I think sometimes with domestic workers, you know, they care for people and then we don't fill the cup back up. So I want that to kind of, maybe it's not richness, it's like a circle that is unbroken between all of those people. And I think if we have a world where everyone is cared for, no matter who you are, where we prioritize that care and want to make sure that everyone receives it equally, and where we understand and really value the respect and dignity that we all deserve, then the world will be a much better place. Much, 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 much better.
Really. Aditi, how about you?
So I'm actually going to borrow the last thing that Jess just said, the values of respect and dignity. To me, with what a truly just and liberated world looks like is when we all have autonomy over our bodies and lives and can live with respect and dignity. And, I mean, that can slot into many types of policy proposals that we work on. We are truly liberated and can live with respect and dignity when we decriminalize sex work, because sex work is work, and people, should be able to choose what they want to do with their body. We're truly liberated when we abolish ICE, because ICE is wreaking havoc over people's lives and bodies. And so that to me slots into a lot of different intersectional issues, because liberation looks like we have true access to what we need when we need it, and we can live our lives in a dignified way.
Marya, Sarah, Ashley, to the extent you want to share.
I'll go. Sarah, were you? I saw you.
Go ahead.
I think for me, to go back to capitalism, I think the one of the problems that I think I see in our culture is that value comes from work and productivity, and that work is also so unfairly valued also. And I would love for us to reorient our understanding of life and society to being one of like purpose and beauty and joy and healing. I think that, if we were to rethink kind of our purpose, and like what is society really here for, I think that this grind that many people are caught up in, where they're like being killed literally from it, would change. I also think that we live in a very individualistic culture. And I think that for me, the more that we can move towards communal ways of being and recognizing interdependence, I think that that'll actually help tremendously. I think one of the things that COVID is doing that we're not recognizing enough is the weakening of social bonds. I think that relationships and trust and understanding is not just built through computers, computer screens. And I really think that the social impact that this is going to have is going to be tremendous. And so thinking about, like, instead of me thinking about the we and like our interdependence, and how is it that we can think about more communal ways of being, to me feels more healthy and more progressive for our future.
Yeah, and I would jump in and say that, I've always felt like healing was so important individually, but also collectively as a nation. And I think that the more that I feel like I've gotten older and I do have children. I have two sons. They're adults now. They're 24 and 21. But I said to myself, I was like, oh my gosh, if this would have happened when they were little, like, I don't know that I could have done it, because they were constantly fighting. They were boys, right? So they were rough and tumble. But I think about the world that they're growing up in and where they're at, and the young people that are coming. And so my twin sister is a psychotherapist. And about 2 years ago, we decided, we both individually, separately, came to the realization that we were supposed to write a book. And I was like, well, what's your book about? She's like, healing. And I was like, mine too. So we were writing a book, and the thing about this moment, for me anyway, I really felt like, okay, I was meant to probably be an artist and a writer, but because of the needs of my community, I've had to be pulled into being an advocate and working on critical issues like saving lives by getting PPE to my community, right? And I'm not the only one that has to do this type of stuff, right? So I think that world really looks like a place where we can have healing individually and collectively, but also have access to resources and funding, so that we don't have to make that decision, that we can do the things that we really want to do, and have that freedom. Because right now we don't have that. It's a battle.
Yeah, I'd like to say yes to everything that everyone has said, and I want to live in all of those worlds collectively. And for me, the biggest thing is really abolition, the abolition of a carceral state where people are punished for being Black, for being brown, for being poor, for being immigrants, for being undocumented, for being queer. And that is really, for me, the truest freedom, is a place where safety is realized, safety for our bodies, for our families, for the choices that we want to make, and also a world in which we live in right relationship with our earth and heal our bodies and heal the earth collectively.
Thank you. All right, well, we have a couple of questions already in the chat. One that I thought was interesting and maybe challenging for some of you all to answer. The question comes from BC. Can each of you name, or whoever wants to answer, name a change that you're most proud to have helped create? I love that question.
I can jump in just quickly because I was looking at that question, and I will say that, you know, at age 16, I was protesting against mascots in non-Native high schools and sexist, racist, spiritually degrading depictions of Native Americans. And so for me to see, you know, the allyship and support that various organizations have done to come together and change the name of the Washington football team, to me, like, that is, like, that's just way, that was my like young teen self dream, right? Like for things like that not to happen. And that's just the beginning. We have a lot more to go, but that's something that I'm really proud to have seen and proud to have been on the forefront of doing.
It's incredible. I'm from the DC area, and God, that has been way long time coming. And by the way, it's no surprise that not only have they had a racist mascot, but there's rampant sexual harassment within their organization. So we see how these sort of power structures are deeply connected. Jess, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, mine is getting the Trump administration to end the criminal prosecution of children and families at the border in 6 weeks in the summer of 2018.
Amazing.
Hashtag families belong together. Yeah, mine, the thing that came to mind was something, Angie, that you referenced, which was the work with Movement for Black Lives this summer. Patrice Cullors, one of the co-founders, came to us and said, we need you. And we were like, okay. She launched the call for defund the police at an event that we hosted. And 2 days later, it became mainstream because of the artists, with the support of the artists, I should say, that were on that call. And it was just incredible to see which is part of, like, literally why my organization exists, like, where a visionary leader like Patrice, an incredible woman, her vision and her call was amplified and heard, and actually, like, shifted, you know, like, the world in terms of, like, what was possible. And I think that just being a part of amplifying leaders like that, to me, is just is really why I do the work that I do.
Yeah, it's incredible. And then, oh yeah, Ash, please go for it.
I would just say one of my favorite things has been helping to educate folks around LA around the district attorney race and just what a district attorney does. You know, we have a huge election, a huge opportunity this November, and being able to, you know, put up a billboard, do wheat pasting, do a lot of push out on social media just to draw attention to how critical this election is, and, you know, the history of our current DA Jackie Lacey, and just opportunities to really live in a place that does not punish people for being Black and being brown.
Appreciate that.
Everyone else went, I can go as well. So my favorite thing that I've worked on is actually connected to things that a lot of people have named today. I got to be part of a lawsuit challenging gang injunctions, the use of gang injunctions in LA. LAPD was putting large amounts of people, 10,000 people, literally that number, on gang injunctions. And once you're on a gang injunction, and they were putting them on gang injunctions with no evidence that they were members of gangs. And once you're on a gang injunction, almost anything you do can be criminalized, wearing certain colors, being, you know, with more than 2 people, standing on a particular block. And then you could, you know, be in jail for violating, basically just exercising your rights and violating the gang injunction. So we brought a successful challenge to the use of gang injunctions in LA. And the reason that was really gratifying is I think a lot of times, this question was so hard for me to even wrap my head around, because it's really hard to see the change that we're doing. Because, you know, a lot of times you rarely get those actual moments where you see the person that you are able to serve. And you can tell the difference that you're making. And this was one of the few times where we got to see that.
Yeah, that's incredible. Congratulations to all of you for the amazing work that you've been doing. Okay, so I think we have just a couple minutes left. And I think just to squeeze this question in, around outreach right now for the election, and like super tight response for anyone who wants to respond. Like, what can we be doing to make sure that people know, are informed, are ready, are activated? Jess, there's something that you really informed me about and like shaped some of my thinking around, is pouring into all of the folks who maybe feel disaffected, who've been registered but then don't go out to vote. What can we do to pour into all of the people who we already know are probably with us, or who are most impacted by the issues we've been talking about, but don't get contacted, get thrown off voter rolls? Like, what can we be doing? So in the like tightest response.
I'll say it's so tight. Here's the most important thing. I think people overestimate the number of people in their lives who are actually voting in the election. Most of the people that you know are probably not voting. So you should just ask everybody you see on Zoom, in live, you come in contact with, are they voting? And the answer is probably no. And so then you should tell them that they need to go and register to vote. This is the time right now to register to vote. And the second thing you need to tell them is they should vote by mail, and they should do it right now, because that will make sure that their ballot gets in on time. So this year, the most important thing is to make sure your ballot is mailed sometime between October 20th and October 24th. I would say that's like a good time frame, because that will ensure that your ballot can reach, go through the Byzantine system of the post office and actually be counted. It's really, really important. And I just want to say, like, I know that in the communities that I work in Black and Brown communities, there's a lot of mistrust of voting by mail, which I completely understand. It has been used to suppress votes in the past, but there is an army of people who are making sure that every single vote is counted, and it is the safest way to ensure that we can vote this year. So vote by mail and vote now, and ask everyone you know if they're registered to vote, and everyone you don't know, frankly.
Awesome. All right. On that note, Bianca, I'll kick it to you to close us out.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Angie, Jess, Marya, Ashley, Sarah, Aditi, thank you so much for sharing all the important work that you are doing with us today. It's completely inspiring and impressive, and we're just so grateful that you came together today to fill us in on how we can be a part of positive change. Thank you for joining us. And to everyone who watched, this program has been recorded. It will be available on our Instagram and on the Fowler website for you to revisit and share. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll join us again soon for our next program on Saturday. Details on the closing slide. Have a great night, everyone.